All right. First question is actually, this was a fax question from Aguascalientes in Mexico. And here is the question. Do you expect to see the English language competence as a work skill to be an increasingly mandated qualification requirement for most jobs around the world in the years to come?
Thank you. A most interesting question, and one I didn't address at all in what I had to say, but one which I think is very profoundly important. It is true that English is taking over by default as the language of global business. And it makes sense to have a global language if you've got global business happening. But I think there are some cultural problems for many people with English being this major dominant language. And I'd personally prefer to see a language such as Esperanto, which has been around for nearly 100 years, become the global business language, with English then being one of the cultural languages that people would have as their bilingual component.
That's right. So you have to have your local language as well as a global language.
Yeah, and I think many people find it a problem that English is becoming both for some people. I think that's not right.
Okay. Our second question is also from Mexico. This was also faxed in to us. Do you foresee that various part-time jobs will be increasingly more attractive than one full-time job for young people, for older adults, or for women? And the second part of this question is this, that could this preference be more a function of educational or scholastic level?
Yes. This is also something that I think is very important, and I did try to touch on this in the module you've just seen. There is no doubt that part-time jobs are increasing, and one of the reasons for that is because they are very attractive to a variety of people. They're attractive to women because of their balancing work and family responsibilities. They're attractive to older people who don't want to work full-time. But they're also increasingly attractive to younger people who are saying, by putting together what Charles Handy calls a portfolio life of multiple part-time jobs, you can actually create a life that works. Whereas if you've got a full-time job, you have to be at the boss's mercy. So yes, I do think those three groups, and probably others, are going to find this trend to part-time work very attractive.
Okay, very good. Let me follow up that with what you said in your presentation as well, that you're creating communities now in which people are closer to their work environment, and how much that is a function of having available telecommunication systems throughout the cities and throughout the workplaces.
It's a function, you're quite right. I've been quite interested as I've been in this country to see the extent to which this is happening here as it is happening in my home country. It's a function of technological availability. If you are now going to build a new community, it makes incredible sense to have it connected with the modern technology. But it's also a function of the fact that it is much cheaper to build these communities around hubs of sewerage, water and other environmental type technologies, which are not particularly new but just as important. And cities are finding it's very expensive to spread people out in wide distances and then have to have them commute into town. So it's a combination of old and new technology that is making this very attractive.
And our next question is also faxed in from Colombia, and here is the question. Will increased working hours for full-time job holders generate greater interest in part-time jobs in the future?
Yes, the first question you asked me today was about those science fiction television programs and novels that were anticipating a huge reduction in working hours. All of the trends show that full-time working hours are increasing. And that makes sense. In an increasingly global business world, business is done 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you were running a business and you could get your people to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you would. But it's much more difficult to have to train 2 or 3 people to do the same job. And so businesses are pushing their full-time people harder and harder. And in some cases, they're getting well rewarded for that. And I guess that's you might argue that's a reasonable trade-off. But in many cases, they're not being well rewarded. And I think it's those people who are going to rebel and will make part-time more attractive.
We were also talking earlier about globalization and the fact that demand is not necessarily at the same time zone that you are. And so that also gets into...
Exactly. And all this modern technology means that you can be contacted from anywhere in the world at their local time zone. And in a global world, if you want to compete, getting there first is an advantage. If they have to wait till your office opens before they can contact you, someone else might have beaten you.
That's right. We go back to Mexico. Well, we don't have time for another question. So let's now move again to your important messages on the topic of this program.